Hi listener, this is From Ideology to Unity, a spiritual journey where we let go of ego and ideological doctrine in favor of meaning, purpose, and unity as a whole. In this episode, we're doing another reading of Quantum Theory and Free Will by Henry P. Stapp, which is published by Springer. And so we finished off the last chapter, chapter 10. Now we're at chapter 11, the fundamental mental character of reality. And without further ado, let's get going. The realistically construed orthodox quantum mechanics described in this book has three components. 1, a physically described universe represented by an evolving quantum mechanical state. 2, an ordered sequence of probing questions that arise in the minds of observers. And 3, a nature that chooses and implements, in concordance with Born's statistical rule, psychophysical responses to the probing questions posed by observers. And note that in New Age spirituality and stuff, there's this idea of the observer in the sense of the I am observer. And then, what's this word? There's this word about mindfulness. When people talk mindfulness and meditation, they also talk about you're the observer, you're not the ego, right? Even in Jungian psychology, there's this idea of the self as a whole, as opposed to just purely the ego, which is kind of like the false self. All right. So, the minds of observers, being possessors of thoughts, ideas, and feelings, are mental in character, while the quantum state of the universe, being a generalization of the classical state of the universe, is often assumed to have the same ontological character or status as its classical analog. The classical state of the universe, according to Isaac Newton, is composed of solid, massy, hard, impenetrable, moving particles, like movable particles. The classical state is thus said to be matter-like in character, not mind-like. It is the carrier of enduring conserved properties such as energy and momentum. On me. However, the quantum mechanical counterpart of the material classical state of the universe represents more potentialities for future psychophysical happenings. These potentialities are images of what the future perceptions might be. The state that carries them, like the potentialities they carry, is evanescent. It is beset by quantum jumps that are linked to mental events. That makes me think of this idea that in Copenhagen mechanics, there's this Copenhagen interpretation. There's this, not even that, in the early forms of it, like by, what's the guy called? Shit, sorry, what's the guy called? It's not Bohm. It's a Copenhagen interpretation guy. Wow, my memory is really reliable, right? Niels Bohr, that's it. Niels Bohr had this idea of the electron jumping from one orbit to another in a way that is, it's actually observed that happens in a way that it's kind of hard to explain. And I don't know, somehow I got this idea that somehow the mind affects that somehow, or at least that it's analogous to quantum jumps linked to mental events. Hence, the quantum state is more like an idea about something, which rapidly changes like an idea does when new information becomes available. then like a material substance of classical mechanics that tends to endure. And what has been discovered of quantum physics would tend to align with that. The foregoing summary leads to the conclusion that, in terms of its behavior, the ontological character of quantum reality is more mind-like than matter-like. The conclusion is far from new. It has been explicitly proclaimed by many distinguished quantum physicists of the past, as the quotations assembled below make clear. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. Max Planck, quoted in The Observer, 25th of January, 1931. So these ideas aren't new. They're just kind of brushed under the carpet. Nope, not convenient. We need to maintain physicalism. Yeah, so the idea that if the micro is very important in explaining the macro, if there is emergence, and there is certainly a heavy focus from the physicalists on emergence, because they talk about physical properties in the macro scale emerging from physical quantum interactions on physicalist interpreted quantum events on the micro scale. And they see everything as emerging upwards rather than being this top-down God thing or whatever. Fair enough, given their premises. But the thing with this is, if the micro level stuff is so subject to change, okay, never mind that. Don't know how a fly got in here, but there we go. If it's so subject to change like that in this rapidly changing when new information becomes available, that is rather than enduring, that's pretty mind-like. And if that's the nature of the micro level and things emerge onto the macro level, why would the macro level be this enduring fixed Newtonian style order when on such a micro level it's not like that? If it emerges upwards, on a higher level, it would manifest in the same kind of way as on the lower level, right? Otherwise, to deny that would require denying emergence at all. And what are you left with if you deny emergence? I mean, there are some physicalists who deny emergence, but is that really a tenuous position? No, it's kind of a tenuous position, I would say. Maybe it's not. Maybe we need to accept that. Okay, but yeah. The universe is of the nature of a thought or sensation in the universal mind. Another quote. Now that is another quote. Another quote. To put the conclusion crudely, the stuff of the world is mind stuff. It is difficult for the matter-of-fact physicist to accept the view that the substratum of everything is of mental character. But no one can deny that mind is the first and most direct thing in our experience, and all else is remote interference, inference either intuitive or deliberate. Sir Arthur Eddington, 1928, The Nature of the Physical World, Chapter 13. Now, Eddington was actually quite a distinguished physicist. Yeah. I think I saw him in a documentary about another character. I don't know, I vaguely remember that. But anyway, in 1961, Erwin Schrödinger wrote, It comes naturally to the simple man of today to think of a dualistic relationship between mind and matter as an extremely obvious idea, but a more careful consideration should make us less ready to admit this interaction of events in two spheres, if they really are different spheres. For the causal determination of matter by mind would necessarily have to disrupt the autonomy of material events, while the causal influence on mind of bodies on or their equivalent, for example, light, is absolutely unintelligible to us. In short, we simply cannot see how material events can be transformed into sensation or thought. However, many textbooks, in defiance of Du Bois-Reymond, go on talking nonsense on the subject. These shortcomings can hardly be avoided except by abandoning dualism. This has been proposed often enough, and it is odd that it has usually been done on a materialistic basis. But it strikes me that surrender to the notion of the external world, alien as it seems to everyday thinking, is absolutely essential. If we decide to have only one world, it has to be as the psychic one, since that exists anyway, cogitate est, in brackets, and to suppose that there is interaction between two spheres involving something of a magical ghostly sort, or rather the supposition itself making them into a single thing. Schrödinger, My View of the World, page 61 to 63. There's something interesting I picked up there, which was, where was it? The dualism they speak of is Cartesian dualism, which is from Descartes, which is the idea that, well, he's the guy who said, I think, therefore I am, but fundamentally he's separated, he conceptually speaking, he separated mind and matter. You could say that technically Aquinas did that too, but yeah, he separated mind and matter, and ever since then, there's been science doing the science thing, and there's been the matter thing, and there's been spirituality and religion doing the mind thing, and I guess, but the mind part of the equation has been kind of sidelined to, oh, that's religion, and religion is bunk. Science, being the legitimate means to truth, oh, well, that's all physicalist, and so yeah, you're free to believe in all this, that the mind has a relevance. You're free to believe that. You're free to have religious beliefs, but it is bunk, and it is just unscientific nonsense. That's the attitude, right? That's the attitude. So, you know, they talk about freedom of religion, but like the mainstream paradigm, but it doesn't respect religion in any sense, or it doesn't respect spirituality. It's just like any view where the mind is anything other than an illusion created from the physical is treated as just like a religious story, an illusion, right? So, and this Cartesian dualism, it splits them into two, and then you can just sideline part of the picture, half the picture. Now there is a different kind of dualism where you can, like, you say that, well, there's a type of dualism in the religious sense of, well, there's the physical world and it's created by God, God being the spirit that created the physical. Of course, pantheism isn't dualism. It's, what was pantheism? It's a holism, right? It's like, there are two aspects, but those two aspects are fundamentally part of the whole, the one. And that duality is an illusion. The whole, the one, has polarity within it, and that polarity gives the illusion of duality, but really it's not, because the whole, from one side to the other of the pole, it's all one pole, right? It's one polarity. And even if you think of the Earth, right, there's the North Pole and the South Pole. And you could say, if you look at the electromagnetism, if you just look at a magnet, right, you get one pole and the other, and it's like a pole, like literally a line, like a shape, pole shape, like an actual, you know, like a bar metal pole, right? It's that shape. And then there's this radiating off from it, this like an apple, this the fields coming off that. And it forms like an apple shape, basically. You get that with magnets, you get that with the Earth, you get that with loads of stuff. You get it with the sun, you get it with loads of stuff in reality. You even get it with black holes and stuff, quasars, but stuff like that, right? It's this shape that you tend to get in nature a lot. And in a sense, magnetically anyway, there's there's one side and another, but the whole thing is one. And if you just be dualistic about that, I was like, well, one side and the other, and that's just how it is. Like, that's missing a whole part of the picture and massively simplifying it, right? And it's not really like that. Well, in a sense, it is simple since it's all one, but you know what I'm saying? So, where were we? Einstein arrives at essentially the same conclusion of the mental character of reality implicit in standard quantum theory, when he complains that what I dislike about this kind of argumentation is the basic positivistic attitude, which from my point of view is untenable, which seems to me to come from the same thing as Berkeley's esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived. Albert Einstein, philosopher, physicist, page 669. There's a numerology 669, by the way. Actually, what does that add up to? Out of curiosity. 21, which adds up to 2, and 1, which adds up to 3. Oh well. Einstein also says that what does not satisfy me. Oh yeah, he said more. Yeah, Einstein also said that what does not satisfy me from the standpoint of principle is its attitude towards what seems to me to be the programmatic aim of all physics, the complete description of any individual real situation as it supposedly exists, apart from any act of observation or substantiation. But Einstein is tacitly demanding concordance with a failed materialistic classical dynamics that is unable to account for the empirical facts. Physics has now advanced to a form that seeks to account only for those aspects of reality that are associated with acts of observation or substantiation. And as regards to the classically supposed irrelevance to reality of our acts of observation or substantiation, William James opined, "It is to my mind quite inconceivable that consciousness should have nothing to do with a matter it so closely attends." That is mine. What human consciousness does, according to ontologically construed orthodox quantum mechanics, is to initiate, by its choice of a probing action, a response on the part of nature that actualizes some aspect of reality that was, until then, merely a potentiality. Thus, our conscious efforts become causal players in the game of converting potentialities into actualities, and thereby influencing reality. Boom, huh? According to realistically interpreted quantum mechanics, we are not the helpless witnesses that classical mechanics claim us to be, but are instead causally effective agents in the creation of an evolving reality. Thus, as Bohr repeatedly and rightfully reminds us, in the drama of existence, we ourselves are both actors and spectators. That was Heisenberg's seminal 1925 discovery, which constitutes the foundation of our quantum mechanical understanding of the nature of things. And also add that the concept of us as actors and spectators is non-dualistic. and are solistic and relating to unity. Not surprising that the next paragraph comes on the title of universal mind. Interesting that that's what we're getting into now, huh? Pantheism, huh? Universal mind. All that we human beings really know exist are our own mental experiences. But we are relatively recent newcomers to the world, revealed by astronomical and archaeological observation. Hence, there is good reason to believe that there exists, in addition to these evanescent human mental elements, a more enduring reality within which our mental aspects are embedded, or from which they emerge. Thus, we can ask, what is the nature or character of this more enduring reality? Now, what it's basically saying is, okay, so if fundamentally observation affects reality so much. Now, so far we've explored, and I've also explored in the Schopenhauer readings as well, like this idea that this effect of reality is not simply on a very small level, whether you move a finger or not, right? Observation affects, so you're observing things. You can technically count beliefs as observation in a sense. Now, what they do is when you observe things, it's kind of, well, the process one picks, based on the mental state of the observer, the a process two, let's say template, and essentially the universe plays that out. That, according to the Schrodinger equation, let's say, it plays out in process two, the process one chosen. That process two is a holographic reality where that plays out, essentially. That's what I think, anyway. So, but there's not just one observer. There's lots of us, right? And you could even say there's consciousness in all things, but anyway. The thing is, though, and it's not just that, because, like, suppose you are observing something, there's a light. There's a tunnel on either side of the light, or the left or the right of it. But one of them is very short, but the other one is light years long. So person A on the left, they see the light of that, the photons from that. They get it and they observe it and they have their interpretation of what that is. Person B, ages later, get that same photons from the same source. Now keep in mind that the observer is entangled in what they're observing by the very fact that photons or particles from that get to them. And they're entangled across space and time. And this other person, at a much later point in time, is simultaneously entangled. Now, it's not just that they're entangled, but they're entangled with everything else that's also entangled with it. Now, if you consider stars across time and space, now with stars, every single thing, that every time you observe a star, every other conscious being, sapient being or whatever, that observes that star is quantum entangled, not just with that star, but you. Now, if you consider the Big Bang, which is, well, supposing that everything happened with Big Bang, that would make, we're all entangled, right? So, and this is just like the tip of the iceberg in terms of, and then there's non-locality, quantum non-locality, which is where things that aren't in the same place are fundamentally interacting in a quantum level. So when it comes to these things and more, a bunch of them we've been talking about in these readings, yeah, it goes way beyond just a small scale. Like, it goes across the whole universe. And this is where the observer, the mind, observers, the mind, you know, they affect reality. And so that's the context here. And the question is, before we humans were here, this is not the subject of aliens, before we were here, even if we were the only beings in the conscious sapient beings in the universe, which isn't true, but suppose we were, then before us, would there even be a reality? But if there's no reality, how did we have come to be in the first place? Did some universal force of nature just choose that would be there? Well, I suppose it's conceivable. But an alternative is that mind existed before we existed. Before physical beings existed, there was mind. An observer, a universal observer, all that is, source, some sort of God, I suppose you could say. A universal mind, perhaps. Hence, there is good reason to believe that there exists, in addition to these evanescent human mental aspects, elements, a more enduring reality within which our mental aspects are embedded, or from which they emerge. Thus, we can ask, what is the nature or character of this more enduring reality? The basic message of quantum mechanics is that this underlying reality has, on the basis of its behavior, the same ontological character as the mental realities embedded within it, not the character of the Newtonian type matter that was postulated to exist by quantum mechanics. The underlying reality in quantum mechanics has the ontological character of human thoughts, ideas, and feelings, not the character of solid particles. Thus, all of reality is made of one single kind of stuff, and there is no logical problem of the kind that plagues classical physics. Classical mechanics bans the minds of the observer from the matter-based dynamics, whereas quantum mechanics bans Newtonian-type matter from the basic dynamics and makes mind basic. Macro non-locality. The complete lack of micro-level conditions in the Appendix 1 proof of the logical need for essentially instantaneous long-distance information transfer is fatal to theories or to philosophical positions that claim that quantum mechanics pertains only to microscopic properties, and hence that the principles of relativistic classical physics work just fine in the realm of large visible properties. The Appendix 1 derivation of quantum non-locality under exclusively macroscopically specified conditions directly refutes that claim. Now, I mean, this is so potent in its significance that I don't really need to say anything about it other than just read it. I mean, unless it's to clarify things. So, yeah, the failure of many workers on the mind-brain or mind-matter problem to take into account this profound impact of the quantum mechanical character of reality within the strictly macroscopic realm, has been the source of a widespread pernicious belief that quantum mechanics has little or nothing to do with the big questions of the basic nature of the world and of ourselves. And why is it that? Perhaps because it's convenient. Because to brush it under the carpet means that you don't need to really question the physicalist paradigm. That it's basically 100 years out of date or more. So why has the scientific community been holding back science for the last 100 years? I could have a tinfoil hat theory, but honestly, it's better left as a question. The belief inspires the related notion that the consideration of quantum effects can be relegated to specialists who are interested in the atomic minutiae, while thinkers concerned with the big human issues can pursue their thinking, apart from the intrusion of quantum elements of random chance, within the simpler framework of classical physics, which excludes our minds from causal dynamics. But according to quantum mechanics, the inclusion of the effects of our mental intentions upon the macroscopic behavior of our brains and bodies is absolutely essential to a correct understanding of the dynamical role of our human minds in workings of nature, and hence to a valid self-image. Some quantum physicists have dreamed up non-orthodox ways of trying to capture the quantum aspects of nature while leaving our minds out of the dynamics. Rationalization, I'd say. But such theories are necessarily incomplete compared to the orthodox theory because they cannot describe the dependence of our physical behavior upon our mental intentions, which are left completely out of the dynamics. A theory that can explain neither the empirical data of atomic physics nor the ubiquitous experienced effects of our intentional, known to be real thoughts may be simpler than orthodox quantum mechanics, but is fundamentally deficient because it is incumbent upon it to explain the data of atomic physics that baffled physicists from the 1913 quasi-classical Bohr model of the atom until the 1925 introduction by Heisenberg of the non-trivial causes of our observational actions. And that is chapter 11. Whew, that's powerful, huh? All right, so what I'm going to do here is I am going to read chapter 12, and it's 1, 2, 3 pages. And then we get to conclusions, which I will leave for at least the next episode. Oh, the conclusion stage actually has, okay, the conclusion stage is 2 pages long. And then we get the appendices, which I've read some of the appendices already. And I have to say, yeah, that was quite maybe the weakest episode of this series of readings on this book, because it was kind of over my head a little bit, because it's like cosine 0 equals 1. It's got this chart of maths, and like I prefer the conceptual aspects of this stuff. I'm not so, I'm not really in the position to be reading all the maths for you, and I was going into a lot of that, and yeah, I had to. I felt like apologizing for that. So honestly, I don't know if I'm really going to go into more in the appendix. Maybe if I find something interesting to read from that. But what I'm going to do, actually, is even if it kind of ends up being a long episode, yeah, I'm going to read all the way to the end of the book, ignoring the supplemental reading. So, yeah, that's actually 5 more pages. Good thing I kind of ended the previous recording, because I was recording immediately before this, and I stopped instead of carrying on, so there would be 2 episodes. And it's a good thing too. It's a good thing too. Right. So chapter 12, paranormal phenomena. Quantum theory was originally formulated as a non-relativistic theory. It was assumed that there was a preferred coordinate frame that labeled each point in the 4D spacetime with 3D spatial coordinates, x, y, and z, plus a time variable, t. The quantum state of the full physical universe was defined at each time, t, and it evolved from an earlier time, t1, to a later time, t2, by the action of a well-defined unitary operator. U, open bracket, t2, comma, t1, close bracket. So there's a unitary or a unified, let's say, operator. And by the action of this operator, it's multiplied by a later time and an earlier time. As to what it means in mathematical notation, what has T2, comma T1, I don't actually know what that notation means, but essentially this operator is a universal mind, let's say, and it's you can say nature in terms of this context of quantum physics, how it's described here. And these 2 different points in time are the quantum state of the full physical universe is defined at each point in time. Oh no, forgive me. Yeah, it's not talking about, this is talking about the prior theory, isn't it? So whatever, I'm not going to get into nitty gritty of that. It's just that, okay, it evolved from an early point in time to a later point in time by the action of a well-defined unitary operator. Just that there's a law of physics and that's the unitary operator and it works by that or something like that. Okay. Time t, as defined by this preferred coordinate frame, played a special role. It defined in each possible value of t a 3D surface that constituted a possible present instant now, that separates a t-dependent past from a t-dependent future. The evolving history of the universe was tied to this ever-increasing value of the time t. The key idea of Einstein's theory of relativity was that there should be no dependence on the dynamical rules that generate the evolution of the physical universe on such a preferred frame. The key idea of RQFT was the idea of Tomanger and Swinger about how to evade all dynamical dependence on any such preferred frame. They introduced, in place of the flat constant time 3D surfaces, t equals constant, the notion of space-like surfaces. Every pair of different points on such a surface are connected by a space-like vector. There is a well-ordered discrete sequence of such surfaces, such as the integers n label on the well-ordered sequence of instants now, along which the famous collapses or reductions of the quantum state of the universe occur. The surfaces for integer n, I mean, there's a bunch of notation here, but the surfaces are temporarily ordered. Yeah, I'm going to change to how I read it slightly from what it said, just because fuck the notation, it just complicates it. The surfaces are temporarily ordered in the sense that for some 3D location, the time is greater than t, and for every xy, for some 3D location x, y, z, the time t in brackets x, y, z, n plus 1 is greater than the x, y, z, n, and for every x, y, z, the time x, t open brackets x, y, z, n plus 1 is greater than or equal to t open brackets x, y, z, n close brackets. Yeah, that's what happens when I read the notation. And there is a unitary operator that transforms a state just after the collapse to the state just before the collapse. Okay, I need to translate. Okay, so there's a well-ordered discrete sequence of surfaces and the integer n represents them along a sequence of now, along which the famous now instance, which the famous collapses reductions of the quantum state occur. So there's a series of surfaces represented by n in a sequence of now events, which are collapses or reductions in the quantum state, collapses in the superposition. These surfaces are temporarily ordered in the sense that some 3D location is greater than t, so time, and for every position, the time is greater than or equal to, the time plus 1 is greater or equal to the time. So there's a later point in time where the state has been changed since the prior time, essentially. And there's a unitary operator that transforms a state just after the collapse to the state just before the collapse. So that's how time connects everything together, I guess. The unitary operator I think, is the natural extension of the non-relative. Is it saying, you know, the unitary U open brackets N apostrophe comma N? I mean, like, I don't know what that means. So in a mathematical sense, I don't anyway. So there's the unitary operator in is N, and then there's U open brackets T. So the unitary, wait, what is N again? Surfaces. Okay. So the unitary surfaces, set of surfaces, is the natural extension of the non-relative unitary time from the case of the flat constant time surfaces to the case of the non-flat space-like surfaces. Okay, so time is flat and space isn't. Okay, and the time-space surfaces, space surfaces, okay. Hopefully you're following. And the time ones are flat, the space-like ones aren't, but both are unitary across all of space and time, naturally. I mean, they're fundamental aspects of reality, right? Even from the orthodox perspective. And Tomonga and Swinger introduced the so-called interaction representation, which has the effect of causing unitary time to be the effect of only the interaction part of the Hamiltonian operator that generates the temporal evolution or time evolution. This part is local, and hence unitary time expresses the local character of underlying dynamics. Unitary space surfaces inherits this feature. Now, I admit I might be missing certain aspects of what it's really saying here, but I'm doing my best to interpret in a way you can understand what it's saying here, because it, you know, it's got mathematical notation, and I am not a physicist at that, right? So yeah. So when it says U open brackets N, or when it says U open brackets T, you know, I'm treating, you know, the former as unitary space surfaces and the latter as unitary time surfaces. I would say that makes sense given what it's saying here. All this may sound rather complicated. Yeah. But it merely allows the ideas of von Neumann's detailed theory of measurement involving the input of an observer's free choice of probing action followed by nature's global physical response to be carried over essentially unchanged to RQQFT. With the earlier role of constant time, I suppose if you hadn't actually, if this is the only episode you're reading or listening to, you wouldn't know what RQFT is, would you? Realistically, no, that's something else. It's oh, it's an aspect of the theory that's being proposed. Anyway, with the earlier role of the constant time 3D collapse surfaces played now by the frame-independent surfaces of okay, I don't know if that's the Greek symbol. A certain Greek symbol of bracket N. So okay. So this frame-independent space surfaces that are unitary. I guess. Wait, that symbol N. What did it say on the last page when it showed that? The surfaces that, and it's shows that for integer and are all temporally ordered. Okay, there was a well-ordered direct sequence of such surfaces Okay. Yeah, the space-like surfaces. So the space surfaces or space-like surfaces, those are treated as frame independent by Tomanga and Swinger. No, by this theory. RQFT treats them as frame independent space surfaces or space-like surfaces. The various paranormal phenomena to be considered here involve a stimulus chosen by a quantum random number generator, QRNG, and then applied to a living subject with the physiological response by the subject detected significantly before the action of QRNG, and dependent upon a yes-no choice generated by the QRNG. Such behavior contradicts the local forward-in-time property of the orthodox RQFT. I do not try to judge validity of the claims of anyone who claims to have found such results, but merely note, first, how such results could be caused by a biasing of the Born rule in favor of the outcomes positively valued by a human being, or favorable to the welfare of some kind of biological entity. A quantum-like theory modified only in this way, but preserving the rest of the von Neumann-described mathematical psychophysical formalism, I call quasi-quantum mechanical theory. I shall describe the very feasible critical experiment that could support or rule out this proposed explanation. The experiment I consider is basically the same as the famed erotic picture experiment reported by Cornell psychologist Darrell J. Bem. In this experiment, a human subject is seated in front of two opaque screens, behind each of which lies a computer window. The subject is told that behind one of the two screens will soon appear an interesting picture, whereas behind the other will appear only an uninteresting blank wall, and that he or she should now choose eventually to look behind the screen, which she feels or guesses the interesting picture will soon appear. I will note that this reminds me of the synchronicity experiment that Jung mentioned in Synchronicity, which I've also done a reading of, where it involved these cards with some symbols on it. You had to guess which one was which. It just reminds me of that. Shortly after his or her choice of the screen to look behind is made and securely recorded, a 50-50 random number generator, QRNG1, chooses the screen behind which the interesting picture, not a blank wall, will appear. And the other 50-50 random number generator, QRNG2, decides if in the picture case, whether the appearing picture will be erotic or non-erotic. So there's whether or not there's an interesting picture and whether or not that picture is random, that picture is erotic or not. It's just two variables, 4 outcomes that can be measured here. Orthodox quantum mechanics predicts that in the subset of instances in which either an erotic or non-erotic picture appears, the subject will it's a wavy symbol. I think that means around approximately. In approximately 50% of instances, what does it mean exactly? I don't know. In 50% of instances, choose to look behind the screen, behind which the erotic picture will later appear. But Ben reports that roughly 53% of the time, the subject chooses at the outset of the experiment trial to look behind the screen where QNR and 2 will only later choose to place the erotic picture. So they're choosing the place that in future point in time will show it. So they're making choice based on the future. In the present. Interesting, huh? This result seems to demand either clairvoyance, in which a subject consciousness somehow knows in advance what QRNG2 will do, or psycho-kinesis, in which the observer's mental aspect somehow influences the physical mechanism of picture placement tied to QRNG G2's random choice. Either one is really interesting and kind of fits within the paradigm here, I would say, or the theory being proposed in this book. Another possibility is that the biasing nature of born rule governed choice at the conclusion of experimental trial of what the subject will eventually perceive. Such a biasing of nature's final choice, of what the observer perceives at the conclusion of the trial could also account for the BEM reported 3% seeming aberration of the choice that subject made at the beginning of the trial. And there is also the consideration that careful attention must be paid to the important difference between the actual past and the historical past, discussed in chapter 8, and to the associated profound truth by Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinow: we create history by our observations. History does not create us. Our reconstructed history is based on our presently existing records of the past, and these preserved records lack, by virtue of the collapse element, the records that record the processes leading to the possibilities that were ruled out by a collapse event, and hence do not survive that collapse event. So the history constructed from the records that exist after the quantum collapse event differs from the history records reconstructed from the records that existed just before the collapse event. History is thus effectively revised, and not just because of human efforts to rewrite it, e.g. for political reasons, but also because of nature's corruption of the records of what was going on before the collapse. Now, I mentioned that these are the records, so to speak, in holographic reality, but in the Akashic records, is all of that, even the things that didn't play out, or at least not in your experience. But other versions of you might have experienced different things, so there's that. In the BEM experiment under consideration here, if none of the above mentioned effects are operative, then the fact that nature chooses 50% of the time to exclude all records of the potentialities that were not actualized would mean that in the reconstructed history, there never was a potentiality for what did not happen to happen. It would seem that nature's actions cause the things that did not happen to not happen. It would seem that within the orthodox theory, there must be retrocausation. And this is something we've dealt with in a prior episode. And yeah, I mean, that's chapter 7, backwards time causation. So, time is an illusion, isn't it? I believe that there is clearly a clearly favorite option, which I call SPQ, or special psycho-kinesis. The proposal to violate the Born rule is tantamount to abandoning quantum theory, and thus should be put on a far back burner. But SPQ respects the Born rule and might also almost be considered a natural part of orthodox quantum mechanics. SPQ is a conceivable feature of nature that would allow a conscious agent's mental effort or intent to influence a SPQ is a conceivable feature of nature that would allow a conscious agent's mental effort or intent to influence a physically described process. Wow, I am failing to read. I saw process, I was like, is it saying processes? Okay, this time I'm going to actually succeed at reading. You know, this is a reading. This is kind of the goal of what I'm doing here. SPQ is a conceivable feature of nature that would allow a conscious agent's mental effort or intent to influence a physically described processes, and actually is processes, lying in the forward light cone of the agent's body, which is a region that includes the agent's body. That one's mind can influence one's future actions as a centerpiece of orthodox quantum mechanics, and much of the paranormal could be explained if this power of the mind were to extend beyond the perceiving subject's body. I mean, non-locality it fits in with that, doesn't it? Thus, in the BEM experiment, the adventurous aspects of the subject's mind would be allowed to influence the physical mechanisms that control the placement of the erotic pictures, and thus influence it in a way that would advance what the subject values or intends. Although there might be some people who might have a negative bias towards the erotic stuff and might like see it less at the time. If they're like, I don't want to see that, that's not appropriate. And so they end up with a result that's more appropriate. So they cause an event in the future that's more appropriate to what they want. Kind of implies that we end up with what we want, even if we don't consciously want it. Maybe some part of us unconsciously wants what we experience. And that's why, even if we experience negative things, what we can do is work on our psychology, I suppose, or do the inner work, and that way what we experience will improve. That relates to the law of attraction, I'd say. So, but it's a different approach to the law of attraction. Instead of like changing your mental states to get what you want, it's, well, I mean, it kind of is that, but it's not focused on the outcome. It's not focused on any particular outcome. It's just improving your mental state, and what's external will mirror that in a more improved way. Because that's fundamental nature of reality, the mirror principle. You're experiencing a reflection, a holographic reflection of your mind. But it's not just your mind, it's collective, right? Okay, all right. So, thus, in accord with the reputed power of positive thinking and also remarks of William James, the agent would hold in mind the perceived desiderata, and nature would then tend to bring it into being. Such an arrangement would allow our minds to effectively do what standard quantum mechanics says they are doing, together with certain aspects of the paranormal, instead of creating merely the illusion of conscious will. So, I mean, it's even in standard quantum mechanics to some extent, right? And we're at conclusions. Okay. Scientists discovered in the 20th century that our minds matter, and that we are not pre-programmed mechanical automatons that classical Newtonian physics had for 200 years proclaimed us to be. They explained, moreover, how our minds matter, how such intangible things such as our mental intentions and consciously felt values influence the behavior of our material bodies. They showed why our mental selves are not, as had been widely believed for centuries, and are still believed by physicalist philosophies, mere passive witnesses to an inexorable sequence of material events that lie completely beyond the capacity of our thoughts, ideas, and feelings to affect in any way. But quantum mechanics entails that we are not mere material robots deluded by the illusion of conscious will. Our conscious will is rather, by the means explicitly spelled out in realistically interpreted orthodox von Neumann quantum theory, able to substantially affect our individual physical lives in ways causally driven by our consciously felt values. According to the orthodox formulation of quantum mechanics, the basic dynamical process involves a free choice on the part of an observer of what perceivable property of the observed system is to be probed or inquired about. Here the word free in free choice stipulates that this choice is not fully determined by the material aspects of reality alone, but is influenced by an input from the mind of the observer. This shift in the basic dynamical structure of nature elevates our conscious mental aspects from causally inert byproducts of the physical brain activity to active participants in the unfolding of a dynamically integrated psychophysical reality. A dynamically integrated psychophysical reality. This revision of the mind-brain dynamics eliminates the seeming absurdity of a consciousness that exists but can make no difference in what happens. Such a causal inertness is in direct conflict with the ubiquitous evidence of everyday life, which strongly indicates that one's mental intentions normally influence one's bodily behavior in essentially the intended way. The quantum understanding of the world, involving the causal efficiency of our minds, while incompatible with the prejudices of the classically scientifically educated elite, is completely in line with the deeper experience-based intuitive idea of each of us that our mental intentional efforts often influence our physical actions. That experience-based belief is the rational foundation of our meaningful creative lives and of the societies that we have created to house this intuitive idea of what we are. The big problems of 1, the connection between mind and brain; 2, free will; 3, faster than light action at a distance; 4, apparent retrocausal actions; and 5, a rational foundation for morality, have all been addressed in this book within the orthodox quantum mechanical conception of reality, upgraded by the work of Tomunga and Swinger to the relativistic form provided by RQFT. Relativistic quantum, actually, just to double check, what is that? Yeah. This is referring to the original versions of quantum mechanics were non-relativistic. The relativistic generalization, relativistic quantum field theory, RQFT, was created in the late 1940s independently, first by Tomunga and later by Swinger. A key new feature is best described by comparing RQFT with the non-relativistic version. In the non-relativistic version, okay, I'm not going to read that whole section, but that tells you what it is. Right, back to where we were in the conclusion. That orthodox theory accounts for, in addition to all the new data, also all of the successes of prior physical theory, classical mechanics, while eliminating its major liabilities, which include 1, its incompatibility with the findings of atomic physics; 2, its incompatibility with the faster than light aspect of nature proved in Appendix 1; and 3, its incompatibility with a belief that is essential to the successful living of our lives, namely the idea that how we physically act is not completely determined either before we are born or by the prior physical reality combined with pure random chance. The orthodox theory rationally explains how our mental intentions per se can tend to make our physical actions conform to our value-based mental intentions. That theory thus revokes the classical idea that we are essentially mechanical cogs in a clock-like universe, lacking any capacity to initiate, by mental effort, actions that can aid our survival, advance our values, or improve the world for others. The simplistic classical conception of reality has thus been converted by a major advance in science to a radically revised image of the cosmos and our place within it. This quantum mechanical conception provides a rationally coherent science-based foundation for human lives suffused with purpose and meaning. A person's mind acts first to construct, from the clues transmitted from sense organs to that observer's brain, a conception of the physically described reality in which the person is locally embedded. I would add that templates for action are involved in that bit. That's where templates for action are involved. The person's mind then directs in mentally intended ways via mental efforts to exploit the quantum dynamical laws that person's bodily actions. And that involves a choice of which template to use. By process 1. Different templates being process 2, I would say. Quantum mechanics thereby provides a rational, science-based escape from the philosophical, metaphysical, moral, and explanatory dead ends that are rational consequences of the prevailing, entrenched, and stoutly defended in practice, although known to be basically false in principle, classical materialistic conception of the world and our place in it. Acknowledgements. In the form and content of this book was significantly influenced by advice and suggestions from Ed Kelly, Robert Benin, Cheryl Sonk, Maria Sildona, Gay Bradshaw, Henry P. Stapp IV, Brian Watcher, Minas Kafatos, and Stan Klein. I warmly thank all of them for their help and support. I suppose the other Henry P. Stapp is another member of the family called the same thing. So there we go. Now, aside from the supplemental readings and appendices, aside from that, the supplemental readings is basically like the bibliography. I mean, I could read that out for you, but it would be kind of boring. I mean, you could always buy this book. I mean, if you really want to get to grips with it. And we've got like appendices with first stuff. You know, I might do a reading with some information from that. Huh. Appendix C, reply to Sam Harris on free will. That will be interesting. Sam Harris is an interesting guy. He's quite intelligent. I mean, he even does meditation. But I sense he hasn't fully accepted certain things about reality, but that's fine. Oh, there's also the graphical representation of the argument. Yeah. I'm just giving you teasers of the sort of things I will be reading. There's also Appendix D, which deals with the paranormal and the principle of sufficient reason. And this is also interesting because Appendix 1, or Appendix A, I mean, that I read out before. Now, that had a lot of mathematical notation, and that was difficult for me to read and put in a form that was comprehensible to you guys. Unless, of course, you know the physics, in which case it would be comprehensible, wouldn't it? But B, C, and D, they haven't got that notation, or at least, well, okay, there was a little bit, but not at all as much. And oh, yeah, there's more I can read. There's more, potentially one or maybe even two episodes. I think it goes to Appendix E, Appendix F, Mind, Brain, and Neuroscience. Whew. You know, I've got more episodes to do because the stuff looks interesting. You know, I could just stop it here, but I feel like more detail, more. If there's things you're not sure about, or this can help clarify certain things, and especially for people who are skeptical still. Yes, this is not the last episode, it seems, but we haven't finished the text proper. Now we've just got Appendix B to F to do, basically, which is actually, wait, how many pages is that? That's basically 45 pages. So how much more we're going to do? Also, there's a conclusion at the end of Appendix G. So yeah, we're not done. We're not done. We've covered the broad strokes of it, but there's more, how to put it, granularity and more clarifications to come. So yeah. Anyway, this has been, reading all of this, I'm really enjoying it. And this is one of all the readings I've been doing, this is one of the ones I've been enjoying the most. Because this book, it's quantum physics, it's science, right? And not just that, it seems to be an interpretation of quantum physics that's like the most solid out of all of them, right? And it proves pantheism, and it seems to be in line with the law of one and mysticism. So we're not these kooky and by we, I mean me and you, the listener, you know, we're not like cranks, so we're just irrationally ignoring the evidence and irrationally ignoring what's logical. Our position is the empirical and logical position. Now, I should be careful here not to be too, there are, technically speaking, all perceptions are valid. And I need to keep that in mind, because it's easy to be like, see, we've got the truth, and then lord it over other people like, see, you're wrong, right? But how should I put it then? This seems to be more of a holistic truth, I would say. Obviously, other perspectives are part of the picture, but I would say this is more useful. But obviously, that's my bias, right? Fundamentally, this is all the things I'm saying in this, other than just what I'm reading. You know, it's all like, it's my perspective, it's my truth, right? And if it doesn't resonate with you, like, don't feel compelled to believe it. Just go with what your own discernment. Make up your own mind. That's really important here. I'm not a guru telling you what to believe. I'm not an authority to look up to. And if you're looking up, if you're looking for an authority to look up to as a source of wisdom, that's kind of, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there, because that leaves you vulnerable to manipulation. And, you know, so many other problems come from people just not thinking for themselves and treating people like a guru. And so this is a common criticism you get of New Age spirituality. That there are gurus and people look up these gurus, and then they just basically, in a cult-like manner, just believing in what the guru tells them to believe, and it's unscientific and not based on anything, and it's dangerous like cults are. That's the mentality, right? And I can understand that, but it's worth considering, or those who had that say that as well could consider that this guru mindset is fundamentally, what is a guru? A guru is effectively a priest. And a priest is essentially, until recent times, priests have essentially been gatekeepers of what's true. And they've been in a community or in a society, they've been community or societies, gatekeepers of truth. Connection to the truth, the divine has been associated with the truth, and they've been the divine figures who access the truth and tell you how it is. And if you don't go along with that, then you don't really fit in, and there are potentially problems for you. And that's understating it, given that there have been inquisitions and so forth. But the same fundamental people's, these dynamics of people interacting with authority figures who give them truth, and the psychology of people, especially people who haven't integrated their shadows, put it in the Jungian sense, or haven't awakened or whatever, especially given how people are very much, they follow authority a lot and consensus, and another way of putting it is they follow the herd a lot. You know, it's something that has often happened, right? Now, this whole dynamic, there is essentially the priest dynamic, or the church dynamic, or the clergy dynamic. This is just a name I'm coming up with it after it, but the priest effect. Let's just call it the priest effect. And this priest effect is basically the effect where people naturally look for a guru or a priest or a religious figure to dictate to them what the truth is, and they're conditioned to believe that that's how they need to do it, that they are not capable themselves of accessing truth or the divine, and that this truth is that they need to align themselves with what they're taught and conditioned to align with, that authority figures, and they align in obedience, it's kind of like a slavery mindset, to the order of things and the values and the truth dictated from the authority figures, the religious authority figures. Now, sometimes the religion has been influenced by historical figures, like, well, I mean, Constantine, the Emperor Constantine. He was a political figure governing, affecting, influencing what the religious figures believed. But on the other hand, there's another direct, it goes both ways, because there are definitely times, like in, with the Catholic Church and everything, that political figures were influenced and heavily or controlled to some extent, by the clergy, right? And they themselves have always been political, right? In many cases. So this is what I call the guru effect, or the priest effect, or the church effect, or the clergy effect. Either works, either of those works, right? And essentially, the way science is, the interaction between the populace and science has evolved, what it's become, maybe it's always been like this on some level, really. It's been playing out this same dynamic. Like, people are acting the same way. The interaction is exactly the same, right? It's just this truth, this overarching truth on a metaphysical level or a cosmic level, ontological level, is treated as a material truth. But the fundamental relationship is a religion. A religion is not just spirituality. It's a structured organizational structure, and set of beliefs around that. So it's basically a secular religion, a secular church. And you might have been drawn to New Age ideas because you were dissatisfied with the church and that aspect, that version of religion, or maybe there were certain things about atheism and stuff like that were dissatisfactory, or maybe both were unsatisfactory. And so you're coming into this for that reason. But then, are you really going to do that and then find a guru to tell you what's true? I'm sharing my perspective here, as other people who talk about New Age ideas are, other content creators and such. And I enjoy doing this, right? But I might even like the idea of influencing people on some level, but fundamentally, make up your own minds. We're in an equal, service to others is equal, right? If you're looking for a guru, you're looking to be in an inferior position in some sense. That, no offense, but that's service to self. I'm not saying you're service to self, but I'm saying be careful, right? I mean, it's the same with sexual dynamics, whether it's the whole master-slave thing, be the same, that sort of thing, and often a lot when it's not on just these things, when the dynamics are someone is being viewed as in a superior position in some sense. When it's like that, that fundamentally makes the dynamics kind of like a master and slave dynamic on some level, right? And the thing is, there's always a bigger fish. So any master is a slave or a master on another level. And this is fundamentally linked to the nature of egos and the nature of the fallen state we're in since the fall of Atlantis. So it's understandable. But if we're moving past that, the thing is, why am I talking about this? Partly it just came to mind, it felt relevant, and I wanted to talk about this. I've been wanting to talk about this anyway, and I might as well do it now. So, yeah, I would advise, and of course, your discernment can mean you can ignore this too. You don't have to listen to me and treat me like a guru, telling me to. If I'm telling you don't treat me like a guru, you don't have to obey it, because that'd be unquestioningly or whatever, because that would be treating me like a guru, right? Like, it's important with anything, like not be treating authority figures, especially the ones that take up priest roles in society effectively, of dictating or saying like, well, what is legitimate to believe, or act like you believe, right? you don't want to be in a subordinate position to that. We're moving past that to a 5D way of doing things. And yeah, there had to be more on a mental level, and mind over matter. Mind is truly what matters. On a mental level, it's important that we have a relationship or a mentality, and a mentality that is equal in nature in relation to how we see ourselves and other people. And we are all one after all. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you enjoyed this the quantum physics aspect of things, especially when it gets notation, it can particle notation, it can be a bit tricky for me to read, right? So yeah, have a great day, and stay aware. Yeah, bye for now.